All right. Get this set up. Make sure the volume is up. Okay. Wait for a couple people to show up. Okay. So, all right, people. Starting to show up. Good, good, good. All right, guys. Awesome. We're going to be going over some, probably for most people, a lot of new stuff when it comes to associating end time or basically everything ecclesiastical. Well, it's a lot of stuff people in general don't talk about when it comes to end time stuff. So it's going to be fun. Just waiting a minute here for people to show up. This is the part of the live streams I hate where I just got to make up stuff so that the YouTube knows that it's working. Okay. So, in general, for a while now, I've been talking quite specifically about the Reformation and the anti Reformation. And in this video, we're going to start tackling some of the big impacts. So, how I've been talking about there's been anti Reformation doctrine that's been put into the world and how it's become, everybody in general, I think, is seeing a lot of how Christianity, especially Western Christianity, has become corrupted. So it's been a snake slowly gaining entrance, and we're going to take a look at this doctrine and some of this doctrine to the point of where it comes from and why it's a big deal and why we need to know this, especially when it comes to things like when we believe that the book of Revelation means this or the book of Revelation means that. That's going to really impact and dictate how we're going to make a lot of decisions in our lives. So with the time that we're in, and I've been talking quite a bit about Jesuit theater and how there's a big push to stage the end time events and to get to a more practical understanding and looking at how that's affecting us. We need to really understand what the Bible and where it's coming from. So we're going to take a look at a lot of stuff people aren't used to. So this is going to be big boy topics today. And we're going to be bringing up some things that are going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Going to address and make some statements that are going to make some people mad. So I'm prepared for all the slander and the hate, just as I am every time we touch one of these controversial subjects. But this one's quite fascinating, and we need to come to grips with how indoctrinated we really are on a systematic platform in everywhere we touch, from movies, media of all sorts, like music, and talk radio, the news, everything has now been an infiltration system, and we've just all been raised into it, and we collectively have created a culture which we now just don't question, not because we're not bad or we're good or anything. It's because why would we question it? It's one of those just assumed things that it's so assumed that we just don't question it. So we've all been through rabbit holes. Let's go through another one. So when it comes to the whole push of the mark of the beast, we see going on in the world today this push of end time biblical conversation everywhere. And we do see the actual, what looks like ramifications of that in our world. Like, it does look like it. The question is, people are identifying getting the vitamins with uh, the mark itself. Well, the interesting and problem we get with these kind of things is they're interesting as an idea, but when we break it down and look at things and try and look at it from a non-biased, non-emotional point of view, which is hard to do in these times, we can get different perspectives. So let's take a look at this because it does clearly say that but the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and liars will not get, participate in eternal life. So there's a lot of unbelievers who are well aware of the issues surrounding this entire vitamin rollout. So that doesn't, necessarily mean it's not, but the unbelieving would not be doing that. So it is not one of these just cut and dry, simple arguments. On top of that, we are getting the propaganda machine going out of its way in order to make sure that this is an argument you should be having. Like they're the ones putting this out there to say, debate this. You should be fearful of this. So they're pushing this agenda. Like we understand that when there's an agenda out there to be pushed, that's what they want us doing and what they want us thinking. So when we look at this, we need to question and say, why are they making this about it? And we've gone over this to some degree that they are trying to use they need to, not trying to, they need to end the whole belief system surrounding Jesus because Jesus is the only way to God. And they're trying to set up a universal system, and that doctrine stands right in the face of it. So there's a war point there. And in order to create a world of basically universalistic deityship, they have to remove that. They're at war with that thought. So by bringing an end to the religions that are associating to that, then they can actually fulfill it and move on and create the world they want. But they need to do it in a manner that's obviously going to be fitting for them. So we see them pushing this narrative while actually creating it. But they're telling you about it. So you would just, common sense, 2 cents worth of thinking would say, if you were, this, intellectually gifted creature of God, would you actually just make it and tell everybody about it and go and put it on websites so everyone can not only just read about it, but then they can know that it's there and that it's coming? And wouldn't you want to trick them into it? Doesn't that make sense? They even tell you who's behind it and, paying for it. So, like, again, they're feeding us this information. They want these thoughts in our minds. Like Bill Gates will use your microchip body to mine cryptocurrency. Microsoft has patented the system that uses human biometrics such as body heat and brainwave activity to mine cryptocurrencies with the patent 666. Now, they're not having these out there and creating these without doing so on purpose to create this hysteria. If so, they wouldn't do it openly like that. Like it's simple stuff to find. And you get news companies talking about it to the point where it becomes mainstream diggable. Event 201 was clearly displayed for all to see. So we understand they want us to know about this, and they want us to think it's associated with the mark. And why are they doing that? Now, this goes back to the Jesuit theater stuff we were talking about because they're putting this show on. They're doing this on purpose to push us into a situation where we do believe the end times are happening. This brings us all the way back to the origins of futurism and preterism, where one preaches the end is near and the other preaches the end is already past. The truth always lies somewhere in the middle, and this Hegelian dialectic is no different, as it was created by two Jesuits, Alcazar, who created preterism by putting all things in the book of Revelation as being fulfilled in the past, uh, at the time of Roman control with Caesar. And then we have Francisco Ribera, who started futurism. In the late Middle Ages, and the Protestant Reformation going on, some of the commentators sought to identify the Antichrist with the Pope of the time. So all the Protestant Reformation leaders actually agreed upon it, so that the figures from the Book of Revelations might not only be interpreted and respecting figures of the past, but rather, just not Emperor Nero or the future of the last days, so on and so forth in his book. But what he ended up doing was proposing that the first chapters of the book of Revelation applied to ancient pagan Rome, and the rest referred to a yet future period of 3.5 literal years, immediately prior to the second coming. During that time, a Roman Catholic Church will be a fallen away church from the Pope into apostasy. Then he proposed that the Antichrist, who would be a single individual, would, and then goes through the list of everything that we see being set up in the world. And the blasphemy, going against God, the rebuilding of the temple, the Christian religion being abolished, the deity of Christ being denied, the destruction of Rome being received by the Jews. Everyone believes that the Jews are behind this, pretending to be God. We got all that religion being pushed onto us, but at the same time, we see just the papacy in general has been converted into that position. They're going to set up a dual witness scenario. They're attempting to conquer the world. So this is all going on according to the Jesuit uh, anti-Reformation, eschatology rewriter. So with this, they created a view that the end times were in the future. And there's a reason for that, because the Protestant Reformation identified the Pope at that time to be sitting on the seat of Antichrist. So they did that to shift away focus from that revelation and understanding that the Protestants came to grips with, that the Catholic system had become the beast. So the head of the beast, and they came to a unanimous understanding then, would have been the seat of Antichrist. Now, this is a interesting thing, because for there's a debate then, like, how much did this influence the world, and where are we at? Because dispensationalism came through this movement. Futurism affects all the millennial choices that are going around there. If you're premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, all these debates start coming out of this need to answer of futurism. Well, the futurism idea is, what we're being seen pushed into our face right now, this whole number of the beast stuff, which is interesting, because when we look at the Antichrist and the Antichrist character, everybody is pushing this forward, that the Antichrist will come and will get the beast number and all this stuff, when in the last time, so we see John talk about the Antichrist in the Bible. And first of all, this is, shocking to a lot of people for some reason. I don't know why. But the book of Revelation doesn't mention the character Antichrist. In fact, Antichrist is a word that only appears under one author in the entire Bible, and it's by John. And when he's talking about it, he's battling the Gnostic religion, who says that Jesus Christ was not the Father. Also, uh, that basically Jesus came in the flesh and died and was resurrected, which still is today debated by the Gnostics, who say, he wasn't a real person. He didn't die for you. It wasn't necessary. It's an allegory, or he was a symbol, or he was an exalted being, or he was this, that, or the other. But what they do is they deny that Jesus Christ came and died in the flesh, and it wasn't a Gnostic representation. And that whole concept of that, a way to approach reading the Bible, is what John was referring to as that is Antichrist thinking. And he goes on to say so, saying, little children, it is the last time. And it is interesting, because he goes on to say at this time period where he was currently living, that it is the last time, as you have heard, that that Antichrist shall come, and even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know then that it is the last time. So John was claiming that he was already living in the last time with many antichrists around. He goes on to say in 1 John 2:22, who is a liar, but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ, he is Antichrist, that denieth the Father and the Son. And every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and that is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already it is in the world. For many deceivers have entered into the world who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. So, there's a lot to be said. So, like, we're not going to go into all these things in great detail because obviously those are each in the thought of those are in their own a video, but it's to just get a general exposure because when we take a look at antichrists, the concept most people have in general is that there's a coming antichrist who's going to take over the world and lead the church astray, and the world will follow him. Well, it's just not actually present. So it's a very interesting dilemma and a very interesting conversation. It's also interesting to note that when John, who is credited with writing the book of Revelation, was also writing about a current situation and time of the destruction of the temple and associating to that current emperor. And he did the math on the current emperor, apparently, because Nero Caesar equates to 666, the number of the beast, which we have all come to understand that the Roman system is the beast system, and the number of the beast is 666. So it is pretty interesting to note that if John, a contemporary writer of the book of Revelation, came to that same deduction that the emperor is the beast, and riding the riding the beast would be the emperor, and Nero Caesar did equate to that number. It does make logical sense that he was writing about a contemporary issue and not about 2,000 years later, as he suggested in his writings that the time was now. And not also to point out, the very first verse of the Bible, sorry, the very first verse of Revelation, it says, to the things that come quickly. So John does have the impression that those times were very much upon him. Now, in order to get a very different and actual, we have to step back before we can start saying this means this and that means that. In order to get even a foundation about what we're talking about when it comes to the book of Revelation, we need to learn a couple things. Like, what is it? What kind of book is it? How was it written? Because without knowing what it is and how it is and where it comes from, we will be able to read it in too many contexts that are going to be absolutely not applicable. But when we do understand what format it's written in, we'll be able to read it and understand it for the language that it uses. So we're going to, in order to understand that, is we're going to look at the suzerain vassal treaties. Now, what are these?
Hey folks, on this episode of Old Testament Explainer, we're going to be looking at the Mosaic Covenant. This is the covenant that God established on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus after he brought his people up out of Egypt. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the ancient Near Eastern concept of a suzerain vassal treaty and talking about how that helps us understand the Mosaic Covenant. So first, let's think about the word covenant. Okay, this is the word berit in Hebrew. According to George Mendenhall, a covenant is an agreement enacted between two parties in which one or both make promises under oath to perform or refrain from certain actions stipulated in advance. Okay. Suzerain vassal treaty. Now, in this type of treaty, the greater party, the suzerain, gives certain benefits to a lesser party, okay, like military protection, land grants, and other things. In response, the vassal, the lesser party, owed the suzerain tribute and, quote, consummate loyalty, all right? Consequently, vassals could only have one suzerain, all right, because if they have another suzerain to take another lord or father, that would be treasonous, all right? So that's kind of your basic suzerain vassal treaty, this agreement between a greater party and a lesser party, okay? Their treaties had six basic features. Okay, so a preamble that identifies a suzerain, a historical prologue that recounts the previous relationship between the parties, covenant stipulations to which the vassal must agree, provisions for periodic reading and safekeeping of the covenant, witnesses to the covenant, and then finally blessings and curses should the vassal either keep or fail to keep the covenant. Now, the Sinaitic or the Mosaic covenant that God established with his people at Mount Sinai has all of those features.
Okay, so what that's talking about is when we look at the book of Deuteronomy. So there was a great event that took place after God took the children of Israel out of Egypt and he took them to the mountain, in which he did form the Ten Commandments and set forth all the laws and uh, ceremony that needs to take place, which is very interesting because it was written. So, if you take the book of Deuteronomy is actually written in the six-part Caesarean Vassal Treaty, which was common to the people at that time. So, the book of Deuteronomy is actually a legal document that outlines not the interactions between God and his children, but outlines the interactions between God and this people coming together in governmental agreement and outlining the things that are resulting from this agreement. And that's why when you come to understand that it has a reason for its existence, then you look at how it's written out. So it has a preamble, a prologue, and then you have your covenant obligations, the storage and reading instructions. We have the witnesses, and then we have the blessings and the curses for those who live up to the standards and those who don't live up to it. Now, the interesting thing about this Caesarean vassal treaty is the Hebrews then became subject to the king who promised them love and adoration, and he would take care of them. And he set out a rules and said, if you act like this, you'll get that, and if you act like this, you'll get that. And this is what governed them. This is why the prophets knew what was coming, was because when the children did this, it acted like that, they got that. It was all pre-written down. So whatever they chose to do, it was already laid out. What's very interesting about it is you can also divide up the book of Revelation in this exact same format as Caesarean Vassal Treaty. And it has the exact same parts because an old covenant the covenant that God made in Exodus came to an end when it was broken, and a new covenant was created between the now new freed church and Jesus, and they use the exact same format of legal document. The Torah and specifically the book of Deuteronomy are legal binding documents written in a legal documented form. The book of Revelation copies that format. So when you go to read it, you need to understand that when you have a legal document like we still do today, it has rules. It needs to have, like this lays out, a preamble, the historical prologue, the stipulations, the commandments, and the good and the bad, and then you have the ratification chapters, and then what's going to continue on. So we have actual contracts that need to be spoken about in specific ways so that they deal with the legal ramifications of that. You cannot read the book of Revelation until you understand that it is a suzerain vassal treaty, and that's why it's broken down into the order and why it says the things it says, because it has to fulfill the requirements. Now, what's also very fascinating about this is that the ketubah, which is the standard marriage contract between the Hebrew people, continued on today in Jewish tradition. What's interesting about it is it's the seven signature sealed wedding ceremony legal marriage document, the contract. Just like the Torah, which are the first five books of the Moses, when it comes to the ketubah, the marriage contract, the ketubah also contains five parts. So when we read it, part one is the combined lineage. The first section of the ketubah is a complete and combined family history of the bride and groom. Uh, and this includes family trees and anecdotes. Part two, the second section is a detailed account of the bride's personal and family history, including a detailed family tree and anecdotes. Part three, groom's personal history. The third section is a detailed account of the groom's personal and family history, including a detailed family tree and anecdotes. And this is a big deal because in the mind of this covenant, these two families become the same blood. So this is a pretty big deal because the two are becoming one. So the families and their family histories now are considered to be one. So this is a big time event in the whole religious aspect of the legal system that set up these contracts. Part four, their story. The fourth part contains a detailed account on how the bridegroom met with related anecdotes. And part five, the responsibilities. The final section details the both groom and bride's responsibilities before and after the wedding. And just like we see in Genesis part one, which provides the family's history and the bride of the groom. So part two, Exodus, we get the personal family history of the bride. Part three, in Leviticus, provides God's family, the Levites. Part four, Numbers, tells us how God's love affair with his people in the wilderness and records his joy and sorrows as he reaches out to his bride. And part five specifies the responsibilities that both the bride and the groom must fulfill. So both the ketubah, the marriage certificate, and the Pentateuch are treaties in themselves and marriage contracts in themselves. And just as we see, Revelation is also a duplicate, and we can see this even in how why there are seven seals in the book of Revelation. It's because in the Ketubah law, you needed to have the seven signatures: the bride, the groom, the father, the groom's father, the scribe or the rabbi, the first and the second witness. So these contracts have a specified outline that have to be filled out, no different than our contracts have to be filled out because it's already been set up for us. And in the same way, we see this taking place in God's standard, where we get our standards from, and he wrote out a suzerain vassal treaty while at the same time making it a marriage contract with his people. And God married in to the children of the Hebrew people. And now we also see that when it comes to Jesus, how he also, his entire coming is associated to the marriage that he's expected to. And the book of Revelation, which is the revealing of Jesus, is all about his wedding ketubah, his wedding contract. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Blessed are they who are invited to the wedding, the supper of the Lamb. This ancient ritual prophetically points to the coming of the Messiah and the great celebration of the marriage supper of the Lamb. It also teaches us a unique lesson about God's covenant love for his people. One would be hard-pressed to find an occasion more joyous than that of a Jewish wedding. In Hebrew, it's called a simcha. Yet in towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem that are deserted, inhabited by neither people nor animals, there will be heard once more the sounds of joy and gladness, for the voice of the brides and the bridegroom. Now, there are three distinct parts to the Jewish wedding, and we see them here: the mutual commitment, the engagement, and the marriage. The bride and the bridegroom sign the marriage contract, the ketubah, in the presence of a rabbi and two witnesses before the ceremony. Unlike a Christian wedding, where it's generally taboo for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, in a Jewish wedding, the groom must see his bride before the ceremony. Which is interesting because in Mark 2:16 through 20, if we read the 19 and 20, it says, "And Jesus said unto them, Can the bride of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then they shall fast in those days." So the time of mutual commitment refers to the preliminary arrangement prior to the legal betrothal. Traditionally, in preparation for the betrothal ceremony, the bride and the groom are separately immersed in water in a ritual called the mikvah, which is symbolic of spiritual cleansing. In Matthew 3:13 through 17, we read that Yeshua, Jesus, has already been immersed by John in the waters of the Jordan. And the bride to be, we are also asked to be immersed, for it says, "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." It's also interesting that after the immersion, a couple entered the huppah, the marriage canopy, symbolic of a new household being planned to establish a binding contract. Here, the groom would give the bride money, or a valuable object such as a ring and a cup of wine was customarily shared to seal their covenant vows. In this public ceremony under the huppah, the couple entered into the betrothal period, which typically lasted for about a year. Although they were considered married, they did not live together or engage in sexual relations. For during the Erusin period, the groom was to prepare a place for his bride, while the bride focused on her personal preparations like the wedding garments and the lamps. Although the new bride knew to expect her groom after about a year, she did not know what exact day or hour or he could come earlier. It was the father of the groom who gave final approval for him to return to collect his bride. Just as it says in John 14:3, as Jesus said, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also." As he promises his bride to go and build a place for them, as according to the tradition of the ketubah contract. The final step in the Jewish wedding tradition is called to take, a word that comes from naso, which means to be lift up. At this time, the groom, with much noise, fanfare, and romance, carried the bride home. Once again, the bride and the groom would enter the huppah, recite a blessing over the wine, a symbol of joy, and finalize their vows. Now, finally, they would consummate their marriage and live together as husband and wife, fully partaking of all the duties and privileges of the covenant marriage. And then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first earth and the first heaven have passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. But there will be those who won't share in our simcha, or celebrate with us because they do not know of Yeshua Jesus. Now is the time to reach out to them while we are still in the Eurasian period before the bridegroom comes. For behold, I am coming soon, and my reward is with me, and I will give to everyone according to what he has done. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come," and let him hear who says, "Come." Whoever is thirsty, let him come. So when we understand, we're talking about the Suzerain Vassal Treaty, which one form of people, a lesser people, are brought in under a greater, and that greater will provide protection and love and all forms of life, and the lesser becomes a subservient to the greater, and that is the body of Christ subjecting themselves to Jesus. So the Suzerain Vassal Treaty of the Book of Revelation is 100% accurate. And when we read it in that format, it answers why those things are there. It is also a ketubah so that it completes the prophecy and all the language that is fulfilled in the Old Covenant itself, which brings forth the fulfillment of it by the creation of the book of Revelation, as it is the continuance legal document that finally brings forth someone who could break the seal and start the new document, the one who could end the old one and create the new. And a new document was created, which was for Jesus, and that document was his wedding contract, in which he is betrothed to the church, his vassal. It is an absolutely, unbelievably, ridiculously thought out overlap of information. It is also why you can't just say the book of Revelation when you refer to this meaning that or that meaning that. Like, so when it talks about to receive a mark in the hand and the forehead, and that no one will buy or sell unless he has this mark, we can't just say it means this or it means that until we understand what the entire book is even talking about, to put into context what we're talking about. Because what we're talking about in that moment is actually already explained to us in Exodus 13, in the suzerain vassal treaty, already established in the previous ketubah. So we have already seen why it would be restated, because it has to be restated, because it's the same contract. It's the same necessary part that needs to be addressed and filled out. In Exodus 13, we see that right after Egypt and the people freed were brought to by Moses to learn the law and start living a godly life, we get this event in Exodus 13 where the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Sanctify to me all the firstborn, whoever so opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and the beast, it is mine." So then Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by the strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place." So we're talking about salvation, because that was the salvation of Israel from Egypt. And that day was to be remembered, and it was to be done with a connection to the hand. So we see this very basic thing. Now let's keep this going. "For it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, in which he swore to give you, the land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month." So now we have a thing attached to this. Okay, so remember that by my mighty hand I brought you salvation, and now you're to keep this service. And he goes on to say, "For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and in the seventh day you shall feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread to be seen within thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters." So he lays out this ritual for them. "And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, This is done because of what the Lord did for us when he brought you out of Egypt." And what are they doing? In verse 9 it says, "And it shall be a sign upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the Lord's law may be in thy mouth, for with a strong hand that the Lord brought thee out of Egypt, the work of the hand and the memorial of the mind." So they're given this salvation reminder in their mind, and then they're given a ritual to perform with their hand to honor the event that God did. So to be mindful and to be dutiful of the things of God. And he goes on to say, "Therefore you shall keep this ordinance at its appointed time from year to year." So you're to be mindful of this. This is something you're supposed to be remembrance. "And it shall serve as a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead. And it shall be a token upon thy hand, and for the frontlets between thy eyes, for the strength of the hand of the Lord has brought forth you out of Egypt." Revelation 14, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. "There shall be no more curse, for they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads." The issue is about obedience and who you are mindful of and who you obey. In Revelation, it says that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This is talking about the suzerain vassal treaty. This is where the vassal must show 100% allegiance to the suzerain. The suzerain is going to provide protection. The suzerain is the only master that you must obey. And in this, we see that stipulation in the contract being set forth. And then it goes to say, "And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in the right hand or their foreheads." So in here, he's talking about there will be a contrast brought forth to you in order for you to have to not fall, right? You see the battle, right? There's going to come a time, and this is how come the Bible talks about this in such marriage terms. You get married, and you're going to be married to your new wife. At some point, you're going to be seeing another woman out there that might be, beautiful, might be of power, might be whatever, attracts the person, and you're going to have to face that temptation. And are you going to become mindful of someone new? Are you going to start doing the things for other people, or are you going to remain mindful and dutiful to your own betrothed, to your own vassal? So we get this understanding of the betrothal aspect in the Ketubah and the Suzerain Vassal Treaty overlapping throughout this and giving us reasons why it has to be in this contract. And it goes on to say, and he causes both of them uh, that they might not buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, this system identified as the beast system is a real eventuality that will take place in this world and manifest when these things take place. Every time the system appears in history, a mark and control system appears as well. We saw it in Germany. And what goes on in Germany is once they got the control and the power and the people backed it, they were all given their marks. They were all given their badges to wear. They were all identified by their number and by their badge. Because it didn't matter uh, what nationality you were, because eventually they turned on everybody. The persecution of the Jews began systematically almost as soon as Hitler came to power. The Nazis established many new anti-Jewish laws. Those were introduced slowly at first so that the civilian population would not realize the extent of the Nazi Party anti-Semitism. Below is a chart showing a small selection of the 2000 Nazi anti-Jewish decrees passed between 1933 and 1945. It is uncertain whether Hitler planned to murder the Jews when he came to power. Originally, it seemed he intended to force them out of Germany, but this eventually led to a plan to exterminate the Jews. So it's pretty interesting how we are now watching the rise of this system. And when we compare it to another form of it rising in Germany, and we compare its actions to what we've seen. So starting in the year 1933, action, public burning of books by Jews and anti-Nazis. So the censorship began, random attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Police and the courts no longer protected the Jews. In April, boycotts of Jewish shops for one day. Germans were told not to buy from shops and businesses owned by Jews. We can take the word here, Jews, and we can apply it to the non-vitamin group. You know, then they would stand by shops to discourage people from going inside. Kosher ritual slaughter of animals banned. Department of Racial Hygiene established. Uh, Jewish students excluded from exams in medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, and law. Jews excluded from military service. Nuremberg laws denied Jews many basic civil rights. Law for the protection of German blood and German honor forbade mixed marriages. Jews no longer allowed to vote and lose German citizenship. Benefit payments to large Jewish families stopped. Jews banned from parks, restaurants, and swimming pools. Jews forbidden to use German greeting Hail Hitler. Jews no longer allowed electrical, optical equipment, bicycle typewriters, or records. Passports were restricted. Many students removed from German schools and universities. Now, it's pretty interesting. In 1938, special identity cards were issued to them, excluding them from cinemas and theaters, concerts, exhibitions, beaches, and holiday resorts. And in November 9th, so 9/11, the 11th month, a night of terrible violence in Germany. German and Austrian Jews are murdered, synagogues burnt and desecrated, and shop windows destroyed. Thousands are arrested. Children are expelled from German schools and passports stamped with a red letter J. And now the passports are removed. They're not allowed to leave the country. Jews evicted from their homes without reason and notice. Curfews established. Confiscation of radios and telephones. And no longer able to receive ration cards for clothes. Uh, Children over 6 forced to wear a yellow star, forbidden to use public telephones, keep animals, leave the country. They had to hand over fur coats and woolen items, not allowed to have eggs or milk, banned from school. And it keeps going. Like when you take a look at this, it goes all the way back. The system hasn't changed. The slave branding, Ramses III, claiming to have captured an innumerable foreign slave group. I brought back great numbers, those that my sword has spared, with their hands tied behind their backs before my horses. I imprisoned their leaders and branded and enslaved, tattooed with my name, their wives and children being treated in the same way. Giving marks over your slaves has always been a way to control and monitor your property. The Egyptian armies captured prisoners of war, and they were called bound for life, a term for slave or laborer. Reliefs from this period depict captured prisoners of war with their hands tied behind their backs. Local Egyptians also often entered into slavery due to an unstable economy and growing debts, which led people to selling themselves into servitude. Sound familiar? There was the chattel slavery, which were the slaves most commonly that were just captives of war. Became royal resources in which the pharaoh then would resettle the captives by moving them into colonies and giving them over for labor or to the temple, giving them as rewards to individuals they saw as deserving, giving them to soldiers as loot. Other chattel slaves were born into the life simply because their parents were. In the United States, the Social Security number for a permanent resident. In Canada, the Social Insurance number. The Social Insurance number, the SIN number. We're all tagged, we're all numbered. We all have a mark on us. We're all marked. SIN stands for the Social Insurance number. The same as your tax file number in Australia, your social security number in the US, your numero security sociale in France. If you're going to work in Canada, you need a SIN card to get paid. You need a SIN card. Sin, the Sumerian Nana in the Mesopotamian religion, the god of the moon. Sin was the father of the sun god. The crescent Nana's emblem, represented by the horns of a great bull. The golden calf was an image made by the Israelites in an incident known as the sin of the calf. Bull worship was common in many cultures. The sin calf, our social insurance number. We're all marked. Sin was represented as an old man with a flowing beard. Where have we heard that before? Isn't it God who's the old man in the clouds, a wise and fathomable God wearing a headdress? 4 horns surmounted by this crescent moon, the last king of Babylon attempted to elevate sin to the supreme position within the pantheon. No, God is not an old man with a beard. That is not a biblical image. That is a Babylonian image. For biblically, the God is invisible. And there's none else. There's no other gods. There's none. God is an individual. He formed everything by himself. He stretched forth the heavens alone. The Lord, the God, our God, is one. And it shall be a sign upon thee, on your hand and between your eyes, because of the Lord's law may it be that the Lord's law may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand he hath brought thee out of Egypt. And we see the exact same thing written in the book of Revelation 14:12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God, the work of the hand. Here are they that are the faith of Jesus, the memorial of the mind. For it was the faith of Jesus that brought salvation. And just as he said, if you love me, you will do what I command. The mark of God in the forehead and the hand, the faith of Jesus and the keeping of the commandments. Just the 10 Commandments, nothing major. Those who love God, this is nothing to perform. For thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Of course not. God is one. Thou shalt not make any unto thee a graven image. Well, of course not. There's no point. You're invisible. There is no image of you that I can engrave. Anything else beyond that, well, that's just paganism. Thou shalt not take the Lord thy God in his name in vain. Why would I? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's my weakness. That's where I struggle the most on because I'm just not used to it. It's a good thing that we have one who advocates for us, and now we know why, because he's our betrothed and he advocates for us just like we would for ours. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not lie about your neighbor. You shall not over desire and become resentful against your neighbor for their possessions. Like, this is all easy. This really isn't hard. But what we need to do is pull into perspective why. And that's what's been robbed from us, is understanding why these things are written down in the Bible. So I've touched on a lot of things that we're going to have to go into more detail as we keep going here. But understand that if you've never heard this before, when it comes to understanding the book of Revelation is about the revealing of Jesus Christ. That means it's talking about when Jesus appeared. The word revelation, and we've been over this before, means to have the lid pulled off, to have the top taken off, to reveal, to show it. Jesus was revealed to the world upon the cross and became victorious when he rose from the dead. He sits at the right hand of God, testified to both by Paul and by Stephen, who saw him on the road when he was defending him in the book of Acts. Jesus sits victorious on the right hand of God, declared victorious in the book of Revelation. And now that we're in a situation where his enemies know their time is short, so they have to pull off all the deception they possibly can and prepare for the coming of the Lord, for he prepares a place for us, and he will come and retrieve us. There is no doubt. But it's not going to be in accordance with futurism, Jesuit doctrine, and the fear that's created in their plan. For remember what God said about their plans. The world devises plans against him, and he laughs. God is in complete control. We don't need the fear, but we do need to be prepared. We need to be motivated to the reality that we are in a cycle of the growth of the beast system. We can see the season before us, and we can be smart enough to learn from the past. We need to group together, come together again. We need to increase the trust in God and the faith in the church. We need to realize that there are a lot of people out there who aren't our enemies, and just because people are confused doesn't mean they hate God. We need to warm our hearts and refresh our message and go back out with the truth, because now the time is really upon us where we are going to see those who love truth and God and justice, and those who stand up for each other and prepare for each other, and those who are just left behind, and those who just don't care. This is going to be talked about for centuries if this is ever remembered. So let's do what Scripture gives us as the hope, which is, you know, when God says, those who endure to the end shall be saved, we can believe it, we can trust it. For the kingdom is being shaken, and all that which can be shaken must be shaken. We don't want a sin invasion in the new house. We want it to remain clean because we can all see why sin has to go. And we have to endure. It's just part of this process. This is part of why sin has to go. And as it continues to increase and the closer the day of the Lord comes, be prepared to stand ready. And know that most of everything that we are dealing with out there right now is not either 100% delusion and being led away, it's at least tainted and taught on purpose to mislead us. For while many are looking for the Antichrist, all those who work in the spirit of Antichrist have come together in order to form an end, and they are putting and tightening the noose as we speak. So let's dig into these tougher topics. Let's push the buttons on people who don't want to be pushed, because the times are pushing and we need to be expanded. We need to come together in strength, and the only way to know is to understand. So let's see where God wants to take this. Wherever you are, hope it finds you well. God bless.